Hi everybody, it's Sabrina. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today I plan on talking about my experience reading in a foreign language for the first time. I recently finished Harry Potter I Philosophers Stone, which is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in Ukrainian. And I just want to share my experience with reading in a foreign language for the first time, finishing a full novel, and hopefully give you guys some tips and advice on my experience with it. To start off with, I will say that there's really two ways you can read in a foreign language. There is extensive reading, which is basically just reading for enjoyment and not kind of analyzing everything that you're reading. So an opposite of that, there is intensive reading. And so intensive reading is basically where you are analyzing, the words. So if there's words you don't know, you are looking them up and, kind of paying more attention to like the grammar structure and kind of, analyzing all of that. So my experience was when I first started reading the first couple chapters, there were a lot of words I did not know. And so I started with more so the intensive reading approach, where I would look up pretty much almost every single word I didn't know. And I found that to not be very helpful in my personal experience. So if there's a lot of words you don't know, you look up a word and then you forget it. Like a few minutes after you looked it up, you already forgot what it was. Especially if you're doing this with like 10, 20 words per page, right? You're not going to remember all of that. And so I really personally didn't find that approach very effective or helpful for me personally, and it really took the fun out of reading. So I read for fun, I read for enjoyment and entertainment, and I wanted my experience in a foreign language to be the same, right? I don't want to read a fun book like Harry Potter and turn it into a homework assignment, right? So I wanted to read for enjoyment. I wanted this to be a fun experience, especially too if it's not fun. You're probably going to burn yourself out and you're not going to continue with it. So for me, in order for me to enjoy the process and to want to continue with the process, I kind of switched to more of the extensive reading approach, where I was just reading for fun and enjoyment. And so if there was a word that I didn't know, if there was a word that I didn't understand, I just kept going. I just kept reading. I didn't get hung up on every word I didn't know. So my experience with that, a lot of people are probably wondering then, how did you learn? How is this even worthwhile? I mean, why would you do that? You're not even learning anything from the reading process, right? But what I found to be a more effective approach was if there was a word that I noticed was reoccurring often and I couldn't pick up on what that word was based on context, I would then look it up. So if I saw the word once and then I kept reading and I didn't see it again, I'm not going to worry about looking it up. It's probably not that important for the story. Now, if I'm seeing the word mentioned multiple times and I still don't know what it means, then I would look it up, and then I'm still going to see it multiple times. It's going to reinforce what that word meant in my brain. And then another thing is that we often learn words in context. And so a couple examples that I can give you is that towards the beginning of the book, Harry is still living with his aunt and his uncle. He is having a conversation with his uncle, and the sentence in the book says, Uncle Vernon blank in response to basically Harry's question or his statement or whatever. And so I was like, oh, it must be he grumbled in response, right? Because he wasn't happy. He grumbled in response. So in order to kind of check my understanding, I looked up that word just to kind of see if I was on the right track, and I was. It meant what I thought it meant. And so another example is when Harry was playing Quidditch, they mentioned the word broom multiple times. Now, I had never heard the word for broom in Ukrainian, and I put two and two together that, oh, they are getting on their broom, right? Because they're about to play Quidditch. And so that's basically how the process of extensive reading can actually still help you learn language, because you are still going to pick up on these words and you are going to learn these words in context, especially when you hear them, or not hear them. Well, I guess if you're learning by listening to a language, it's the same concept. But as far as reading, when you read the word multiple times, you're eventually going to pick up on what it means if you are seeing it repeated throughout the book. And so that's basically how it works. And I found that to be a much more not only enjoyable but effective way, in my opinion, on kind of using reading to learn a foreign language. And again, it makes the process more fun. I will say in the beginning of the book, it was a lot more challenging. And there is a video that I watched even before I started reading Harry Potter in Ukrainian that explained this process really well. I will post it down in the link below, so you guys can check that out if you are interested in learning reading in a foreign language, and especially if you're interested in reading a series like Harry Potter. It does explain kind of how this works. But basically what the video describes is that when we first start a novel like Harry Potter, the first 5 chapters or so, we're getting exposed to so much new vocabulary that's related to this world. So for example, in Harry Potter, we have the word wand, we have the word robe, we have the word broom, like I mentioned. There's so many words that are specifically related to the topics that are spoken in the book that maybe aren't really used normally, generally in everyday life, right? As you progress through those chapters, you are picking up on that vocabulary and you're learning that vocabulary, and you're getting exposed to less and less new vocabulary as the story goes on because you've already learned it all in the first couple chapters. So I found that I think that was my experience because I had a really hard time getting through the first couple chapters when I first started. There was a lot of words I didn't know. I was reading full sentences where sometimes I didn't even know what the full sentence says, which was pretty bad. But I found the more and more I progressed through the story, the easier and easier it got. And the less and less I was having trouble with that. I was understanding full sentences, maybe a word or two here or there. I'm not going to lie to you guys and say that by the end of the story, I was understanding everything that was happening, like every word that was being mentioned, right? Because that's not the case. But I was understanding enough. I was understanding the plot. I was understanding the story. I was understanding the characters, right? And I really think that is the most important thing. If you understand enough to understand what's going on, to understand the story, to understand the plot, I think that you're at a good place to read the novel. And I mean, if you think about it, even in your native language, so like for me personally, English is my native language. I still come across words when I read books in English that I don't know, and I don't look it up. I don't care to know what the word is. Sometimes I do, but usually not. I just continue reading with the story, or sometimes I can just guess what the word means based on the context, right? Same with reading in a foreign language. And so I think too, when we think of the grand scheme of things, when we read a book, we don't remember every single word we read in the book. It's not like we memorize the book by heart, word by word, right? We remember the story, remember the plot, we remember the characters, right? So if you're understanding all of that when you're reading in a foreign language, I think that that's really all that you need to continue going with the process and to make it enjoyable. If I understand what's going on and I am enjoying what I'm reading, then does it really matter that I didn't know what this one word meant? Not really, no. And so that's my thoughts on kind of extensive versus intensive reading. Another thing that I kind of noticed at the beginning that was a little bit more challenging for me was that I found that dialogue, spoken language between the characters, was a lot easier for me to understand than long like descriptions of like scenery and kind of descriptions of what the characters were doing. And I think the reason for that is that when we learn a language, a lot of the words that we learn are more words that are used in everyday context. Those are the words we usually learn first and that we usually pick up on the most quickly. And then when we read, there's a lot more descriptive words that we probably don't use in our everyday life, because in our everyday life, we see the scenery, we see what people are doing. We don't need to describe it. Whereas an author does need to do that when we read a novel, because we need to be able to picture or understand in our brain what is going on and where the characters are at, the setting, things like that. And so I think there's a lot more vocabulary you pick up on when you read a book that you're just not going to learn from everyday conversation, right? Or if you do hear it in everyday conversation, it's probably going to be very few and far between. But you are going to pick up on those words, and you are going to pick up on that vocabulary more so, when you read it in a novel. And it will be more challenging in the beginning because there's just so many more new words, right? But again, that'll be easier the more you are exposed to it and the more you kind of read it in the novel. So there's another phenomenon that I've heard of before. I heard it more so related to not a specific language, but just in general, that when we read, we're not looking at every single letter usually when we read, our brain kind of knows what words look like. So this is kind of hard to describe, but when we see a stop sign, for example, and we read the word stop on the stop sign, we just, like, our brain knows what the word stop looks like. We don't have to read S-T-O-P-O, stop. We just know it's the word stop, right? Because we've seen it so many times. Same concept as Chinese letters or characters. They're just a single symbol for a word, right? But in the Latin alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet, when we spell out words, the picture is formed from the letters, but it still is forming a picture, right? And so, same concept, I think, with reading in the foreign language, is there's lots of words that I started to see like so frequently that I've just read so many times that I don't have to sit there and like read it out and learn it every time, right? Like bachelor, or skazala, like she said, she saw, right? These are words that I know, like I've seen it so many times in the book that I just know what the word looks like. I know what it's spelled. I know what it looks like. So I don't have to sit there and sound out the whole word every time I read it. Versus new words that maybe I haven't seen very often, or words that I know that maybe have a slightly different ending to it, because Ukrainian does that. It has like 6, 7 different endings to words, which can make it really hard. If it's the same word but the ending's a little different, it might take me a while to kind of sound it out. But that becomes easier again the more I read, because I start to see those words more often, and then my brain starts to learn what they look like, right? And so it makes it a lot harder in the beginning because you don't know what those words look like yet. And the more you read them, the more your brain's exposed to them, the more your brain picks up, the less you have to sound words out, and the more you just know them. Like you can read it and you just see it and you just know what it looks like. Your brain is just recognizing those words more quickly, I guess is the best way to say it. So that was my kind of experience with reading for the first time in a foreign language. I will say it did get a lot easier as I went along, and so I do think that this is helpful. I do think that this is something I am going to continue with. I have bought in the whole Harry Potter series in Ukrainian, and I will say Harry Potter is a good series to start with in a foreign language for 2 reasons. It doesn't have to be Harry Potter, but I'm going to say for my personal self why Harry Potter is the best choice, and you can make an educated decision on what might be the best choice for you. So for me, Harry Potter it's easier. It is not written for adults, right? Harry Potter was at least originally written for kids, and then as they age, it gets a little bit more advanced for like teenagers, young adults. But it was originally meant to be a novel for children, right? So the vocabulary that is being used, the words that are being used, they are not difficult words and vocabulary, right? So that, for one, is going to make it easier than trying to read a adult novel. So for example, right now I'm also reading, because I've kind of been reading an English novel and the Ukrainian novel at the same time, depending on the mood I'm in, right? And just wanting to switch up between both. But right now I'm also reading 1984. 1984 is like a complex, like political, like you want to deep dive into it and you want to understand kind of the subtle messages and things that are being said in it. That would not be a good book to read as your first novel in a foreign language. I mean, if you want to, more power to you, but that would not be a book that I would personally choose to read in a foreign language. My native language, yes, right? I know my native language. I can pick up on those subtleties. I don't have to worry about trying to pick up on those subtleties while also trying to understand the words. I already know the words, right? So for me personally, that would not be the type of novel I would recommend as your first novel in a foreign language. I would recommend something that's a little bit more geared towards not necessarily babies or like little kids, but something you're still going to enjoy, but the vocabulary is not complex and the storyline is not complex, right? Another reason that I think Harry Potter was a perfect choice for me personally was because I have read this book so many times in my childhood. I used to read these books every summer, so I've probably read them like 4 or 5 times at this point. I can't even tell you how many because I've read them so many times I've probably lost count. So probably 4 or 5 times, quite a bit. And I've also seen the movies a bunch too. So I know what happens, I know the plot, I know the characters, I know the story, right? So I don't have to sit here and guess what's happening because I already know what's happening and I already know what's going on in the story. So makes it easier for comprehension, and it also makes it easier for you to not feel lost with the story, right? Now, if this is a new story and I had never read Harry Potter before, I don't think that this would have been a good choice for my first time reading in a foreign language, because if I were to miss out on a subtle detail, I would be lost and I would probably have no idea what's going on, right? And I would probably get frustrated and kind of give up. So I think that if you are going to do this, I think that you want to find a book that you've read before and you know the story back, forward, inside out. You know what's going to happen. You know what's going on. So, you know, there's lots of novels series like this that I know I personally grew up with. Twilight, The Hunger Games, the Percy Jackson series, where those were books that I enjoyed and I read, right? I didn't read them to the same extent I read Harry Potter. I didn't read them a lot, but those may have been books that you personally did read multiple times in your childhood that you do know the story back, forward, inside out, right? And so those might be a better option of a series for you to start your reading in a foreign language journey with, right? I know personally, for me, a big reason I also picked Harry Potter personally in Ukrainian was I read it so many times, but also Ukrainian is not a common language. It is not a language a lot of people want to learn. It is not a language that is spoken throughout a lot of the world, right? It's really just spoken in Ukraine. It's a very niche, small language where there's not a lot of people, you know, wanting to learn it. And so finding books in Ukrainian when you live in the United States is not an easy thing to do. And I happened to find the whole series. I bought the whole set on Amazon, and I was ecstatic that I found them because I've looked up other books on Amazon in Ukrainian, and I can't find anything like equivalent. I can't find The Hunger Games. I can't find Percy Jackson. I can't find Twilight. Like, I can't find anything like that, at least on Amazon. I'm sure they exist. I'm sure they've been translated, and I'm sure if you went to Ukraine, you could buy those books, you know, in Ukrainian, but I can't find them so anywhere that I can buy them, you know, where I live. But Amazon did have the whole Harry Potter series in Ukrainian. So really it was the perfect thing for me for my personal language learning journey. Now, this advice applies really to any language that you want to learn. So if you want to learn Spanish, if you want to learn French, if you want to learn German, if you want to learn Arabic or Chinese, Mandarin, specifically Chinese, whatnot, right? Whatever target language you want, you know, find a novel, find a series that you know and that you love in that language. So some of those languages are going to be a lot easier than others. One, to learn, right? Chinese and Arabic are a lot harder to learn than Spanish or French, right? But two, some of those languages, depending on what you're going to want to learn, you're going to have an easier time finding resources for, right? So Spanish in the United States, it's really our second most spoken language in the United States. I mean, there's whole communities and states where Spanish is almost, I don't want to say almost as spoken as English, but you know, it's getting there. It's close. You know, we have a lot of you know, immigrants from Mexico and South America, right, who speak Spanish. And so finding Harry Potter in Spanish is going to be a lot easier. Finding Percy Jackson in Spanish, finding Twilight in Spanish, finding Hunger Games in Spanish, right? It's going to be a lot easier. And so you're going to have a lot more options. So that kind of too depends on what language you're learning. But you should be able to find something. Even if you have to look it up online or buy like a digital copy, you know, there are options. But that would kind of be, you know, my recommendation as far as that. So a couple other things I'll touch on this video. It doesn't really have to do with the language learning process of reading Harry Potter in Ukrainian, but more so just my personal experience with reading the books again, which I thought was kind of fun. You know, when you read a book, obviously there's some subtle differences between the movies, right? And so it's been a while since I've read these books again. I read them in my childhood. It's probably been like maybe 10 years since I've read them. So there were some details I picked up again this time around that I'd probably kind of like forgotten about. And so one of those things was that Harry actually met Malfoy for the first time in Diagon Alley. I think they were in if I'm remembering correctly, they were in the robe shop getting their robes fit. and he's kind of talking with Malfoy, and Malfoy's kind of bad talking about Hagrid and Muggles and things like that. So I thought that was interesting detail. I also noticed there was a detail where, Hagrid is, they take Harry to go get his wand and stuff, and they're talking about how Hagrid, he was expelled before, and so he can't have a wand, and, his wand was destroyed and this and that. And it sounded like he didn't want anybody to know. It sounded like he secretly did it, but he put pieces of his old wand in his little magic umbrella that he uses. So I thought that was a fun little detail. What else? There was a detail where after Quidditch, he goes and he follows like Snape and Quirrell. Like Snape and Quirrell kind of go off in the Forbidden Forest, and they're kind of having a little conversation. Harry kind of follows them on his broom after the Quidditch game and kind of overhears some of what they're talking about. Another thing was that after Hagrid had taken Harry to Diagon Alley, it sounded like Harry actually went back to his aunt and uncle's for a couple weeks before he started school, which I thought was interesting because in the movie it's portrayed he just goes right to Hogwarts after Diagon Alley. And it talks about him reading some of the books that he had bought for school and things like that, which again is a fun detail because they always portray in the movies that Harry and Ron don't really read, right? That Hermione's like the only one that's the smart, person who reads. And then the last detail that was really big was the ending where Harry is going through all the challenges to get to Quirrell to save the Sorcerer's Stone. Each professor basically had a obstacle to get through to get to the stone. So some of the ones that were in the movie, right, like the Fluffy, getting past the three-headed dog, getting past the plant that wanted to, kill them, getting past... they had to unlock the key. They had to grab the key from like Quidditch basically on the broom. They had to play the chess game. Those are all ones that are mentioned in the movie, and they're mentioned in the book as well. But there was also a troll that was already knocked out by Quirrell that they would have been a challenge that they would have had to have done. And there was a potion from Snape where they had to figure out the correct potion in order to get past like this fire to be able to go to the room to get to the mirror. So again, I thought that was kind of a fun little detail. I understood why they left out in the movie because those obstacles weren't as exciting. I mean, a dead troll that's already dead, you don't need to really include that. But yeah, just some things that I noticed in the book that were a little different, kind of some small details that were left out of the movie that I was able to pick up on. One, because I read the books again, and two, I thought it was kind of fun that I was still able to pick up on those types of things reading in a foreign language. So again, if you're reading and you're picking up these small details and you're understanding the plot, if you're not understanding every single word, I really don't think that it is a big deal, especially if this is a book that you already know the plot and the story to. That was my basically my experience with reading for the first time in a foreign language. Hopefully you guys got some good tips out of this video. I know when I was looking to do this and when I was looking to, start my process of reading Harry Potter for the first time in Ukrainian, and I was kind of wanting like tips and hints and advice, I really didn't find a lot of videos about it. I mean, I did see some, and like I said, I'm going to include one down below that I personally thought was helpful and encouraging for me to do this. So I hope that I included some good tips and advice that you guys will enjoy and that will help you with your process of doing this. I will say it is challenging, but it is very worth it. I think you'll be very proud of yourself and feel very accomplished if you are able to do this. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. I am going to finish the series, or continue with the series. I am going to start with Harry Potter I Tajemna Kimnata, Harry Potter in the Secret Room, Chamber of Secrets. I am going to start this one now that I have finished the first one. So we'll see. This first one did take me a while to finish. It's been almost... 9-10 months, so if you think about it, almost a year, well, a little less, but so it was a lengthy process for me to read the first one, but as I said, it had gotten easier the more I continued with the story, and so I do think that this one will be a little bit easier and quicker for me to get through. It's roughly the same amount of pages as the first book, so I don't think the length will be an issue. But I will, same as this first book, I'll kind of, update you guys and let you know my thoughts and processes on reading, my second book. And I really think that if I'm able to get through the whole series, it's going to really open some doors for me. I think that it really opens, you know, the possibility of really reading whatever you want going forward. You know, like I said, starting out with text that's a little bit more child oriented or teenager oriented is a good place to start. But I think that same process as when we read in our native languages growing up. We start with easier content, and then we're able to then read harder and more challenging material. And so I'm really excited about, you know, what this means for as far as the future going forward on, you know, what I'll be able to kind of, you know, read and know and understand in Ukrainian. If you guys found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to my channel. I do talk a little bit about language learning, specifically reading books in language learning. You know, this something that I really enjoy doing, and I have a lot of very personal reasons why I want to learn this language, and so I do talk about my language learning experience on this channel, and I also read for fun books in English, and so I, you know, kind of talk about the books that I read, give my thoughts on them. And so if that's something that you guys are interested in, again, please like and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully we'll see you again in another video. Bye.